John lay still in the darkness, the cold stone of the catacomb floor leaching the last warmth from his body. His jacket, once olive green and whole, was torn open at the shoulder, damp with blood, dirt, and something slicker than water. His breath came in shallow gasps, fogging in the heavy air, his pulse a frantic drum against his ribs. It was still, except for the thunderous slow breathing. Not his. From somewhere deeper in the abyss, a colossal inhale, wet, ancient, filled the silence. Each exhale rolled through the chamber like distant thunder muffled by earth and bone. It was rhythmic, deliberate, and impossibly alive. The walls around him were slick, textured like reptile hide soaked in brine. The ceiling arched in ways that suggested neither architecture nor natural formation, it curved like something grown, not built. And the air it throbbed, as though the space itself breathed with the thing below. Shapes moved at the edge of his vision, figures that might have once been human or never were. Tall, hunched things with warped torsos and limbs that bent in wrong directions. One dragged itself along the wall, its skin mottled in patches of gray and a sheen like mucus. Another crouched near him, unmoving, its arms too long and ending in fingerless nubs that pulsed slightly, as though sensing the air. They watched, but they did not speak. He wanted to scream, to run, but the fog in his mind was thick. He couldn't remember how he got here. Only that there had been a sermon, a voice, and Stacy. Stacy. His lips cracked as he whispered her name, but the word barely escaped. Something shifted in the dark above him, a low, groaning stretch of stone or flesh. A thick tendril, black, wet, and glistening, descended from the ceiling, hovering, waiting. He remembered now. The tabernacle, the leader's eyes, the way his voice wrapped around you like silk, and stripped everything away. John closed his eyes. The breathing of the thing below deepened. Slow. Starving. This was not a place of God. This was where God had fled from. And then he remembered how it had begun. The road into the valley curled like a lazy serpent between pine-covered ridges. It was early spring when John and Stacy arrived, the trees still damp from snowmelt, the sky a soft gray that never seemed to brighten. Their U-Haul clattered behind them as they coasted into town, just a scattering of shops, a gas station, and a handful of brick buildings whose age showed in the moss along their bases. Stacy leaned forward in her seat, squinting through the windshield. "It's quiet. That's what you wanted, right?" John said with a half-smile. "Quiet, affordable, and blessedly HOA free." They both chuckled. It had been Stacy's idea to leave the city after the market swallowed John's IT job and chewed up their rent in the same breath. The valley town of Bell's Hollow was cheap, pretty in an old America kind of way, and according to the real estate agent, a close-knit community. Their new home was a modest two-bedroom cottage with a rusted mailbox, a tilted porch swing, and an inexplicable smell of lavender inside, even though no one had lived there in over a year. That first week was uneventful. The neighbors were polite but distant. Everyone smiled with a kind of warmth that didn't quite reach their eyes. The grocery clerk asked if they'd be attending services at the Tabernacle soon, and a waitress at the diner mentioned it offhandedly as where the soul finds alignment. They heard it 3 more times in the first 5 days. And then Stacy said it. "Maybe we should check it out this Sunday." The Tabernacle of St. Ivy wasn't much to look at, just a small, white wooden church nestled at the end of a gravel path behind the post office. It had a steep gabled roof and a single steeple that stretched above the tree line, its peak sharp and bare. There was no cross, no nameplate, no denomination listed anywhere on the premises, just a simple wooden sign out front. The Tabernacle, all are seen. Inside, the building was brighter than expected, lit by tall windows that let in the pale morning light. The walls were whitewashed, the pews narrow and plain. No altar, no symbols, no stained glass. The congregation was quiet but not somber. When John and Stacy arrived, heads turned, not in suspicion but in recognition. They were expected. They took seats near the back. A tall man in a charcoal gray suit stepped to the front. He was neither old nor young. Thin, but not unhealthy. His black hair was combed precisely. When he raised his head, John noticed his eyes, gray, almost colorless. They seemed to take in more than they let out. "Welcome," he said, his voice soft but perfectly audible. "Let us begin." He spoke for nearly 20 minutes, and yet afterward, John couldn't recall a single point. There were no readings, no mentions of any god by name. Only abstract ideas, of transcendence, of becoming more, of shedding old selves and taking in the truth of silence. Stacy leaned against him at one point. He thought she had dozed off, but her eyes were open, glossy, fixed on the man's face. Later, in the car, John tapped the wheel absently. "Did you notice no one called him anything?" Stacy looked out the window. The guy. The speaker. People called him pastor, father, minister, but not the same thing. One woman called him priest. She shrugged. "Maybe they call him what he is to them. That's kind of beautiful." John wasn't sure he agreed. By the end of the month, Stacy was fully immersed. She baked for church socials. She helped organize donation drives. She sang softly around the house, melodies John didn't recognize, in no language he understood. "He really brings people together," she'd say about the man, never calling him by title or name. "You can just feel it. Like warmth." John didn't feel warmth. He felt nothing. That's what bothered him. Each week, he sat through the sermons, but when he tried to recall them afterward, he came up empty. Just a gentle hum in his memory, like something had been smoothed over. After one Sunday service, a young man with a pale complexion and watery eyes approached him. "He'd like to see you if you're ready." "Who?" The man smiled vaguely. "The father. Or pastor. Whichever suits you." John followed him to the back of the tabernacle. There was a door behind the pulpit he hadn't noticed before, plain wood, worn handle, no cross. Inside was a small chamber with a single, unlit candle and a chair. The man, whatever he was, stood with his hands behind his back, facing the wall. "Sit," he said. John did. The door closed with a soft thud. The man spoke in low tones, but John couldn't process the words. It was as if each sentence floated past him just before he could grasp it. A warm buzz settled in his skull. Time seemed to drip. And then, nothing. John found himself on the church steps, blinking in the sunlight. Stacy appeared at his side, smiling. "Well?" she asked. He hesitated, then smiled back. "He's something else." The first dream came in fragments. John floated, not through air, but through something thicker, like water the temperature of blood. His arms drifted at his sides, his feet never touching ground. The corridor he moved through was narrow and wet, its walls pulsing slightly with each inhalation from something unseen. At the edge of his awareness, a dull, heavy breathing echoed, slow and vast, like a leviathan drawing in its final breath. He awoke drenched in sweat. Stacy lay beside him, whispering in her sleep. The words were guttural and fluid, laced with sharp stops and wet consonants. Not English. Not anything John recognized. And yet, he understood them. At least the feeling behind them. Worship. Surrender. Becoming. He sat up slowly, trying to clear the dream from his mind. His fingertips brushed the edge of the sheet, and something dark smeared across his knuckle. He brought his hand up to the light, a black residue, gritty like ash, streaked beneath his nails. Over the next week, the dreams repeated. The corridor deepened. He saw glimpses of pale, glistening skin, limbs that didn't bend correctly, a woman standing ankle-deep in dark water, her mouth stretched unnaturally wide. He woke with aches in his spine, pressure behind his eyes. Stacy was changing too. She hummed now when she cooked or folded laundry, her voice lifting into odd intervals, almost like a chant. She had taken to spending long hours at the Tabernacle, helping prepare, she'd said. John started noticing movement where there shouldn't be any. shadows shifting at the corner of a building, only to find nothing when he turned. The mirror in the hallway once showed a second shape behind him, just for a flash. He blamed fatigue. Trick of the light. But he couldn't shake the feeling. One night, unable to sleep, he walked to the kitchen for a glass of water. The streetlight outside flickered once, and in that instant of darkness, he saw something crouched near the tree line, low to the ground, the shape of a man, but too long. Its head turned toward him. When the light flicked back on, it was gone. John stood frozen in place, the glass trembling in his hand. He didn't tell Stacy. He only murmured to himself, "Dreams. Just dreams." The wind was low that night, carrying the sharp scent of rain-soaked wood and faint, earthy rot. John lay awake, half dreading another dream. But it wasn't sleep that came, it was silence. A silence too complete. He turned to find Stacy's side of the bed empty. A low chill crept up his back as he sat upright. "Stacy?" he called softly. No answer. He checked the bathroom, the living room, the kitchen. Nothing. The front door was unlocked. A cold, tight knot formed in his chest. She didn't drive anywhere. Her keys were still on the hook. He pulled on his jacket and stepped outside barefoot, the gravel biting at his soles. In the distance, the lights of the Tabernacle were glowing faintly, too faintly for this hour. And then he saw them. Silhouettes, 5 or 6, walking slowly down the empty street toward the church. Silent. Fluid. Stacy was among them. John followed at a distance, careful to stay in the dark between streetlights. Several times he thought he saw something else in the shadows, off to the side, moving parallel to him. Something low and smooth and watching. When he turned to look directly, nothing was there. He told himself it was his imagination. It had to be. The group entered the Tabernacle through the front doors, which somehow swung shut without a sound. John crept forward, pressed a hand to the door. Locked. He circled the building, searching for another entrance. A basement door? A side hatch? He found nothing. But something nagged at him. The leader's office. He had only seen it once, during his own private meeting. There was a strange floor pattern carved into the stone beneath the man's desk. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. But now. John tried the office door. It creaked open. The room was empty. Unlit. The desk stood as it had before, immaculate. But the floor, the carvings were glowing faintly now, traced with pulsing lines like veins. He stepped closer, and beneath the desk, he saw the faint outline of a seam. A trapdoor. He reached down and pulled. It opened with a hiss of ancient, damp air. Below was a staircase descending into darkness. Wet stone. Faint chanting, barely audible, rose from below. John hesitated only a moment. Then he stepped down into the dark. The stairs creaked beneath John's feet as he descended, the smell of damp stone and something older rising with each step. The deeper he went, the more the light above dimmed into memory. Eventually, his hand brushed the wall, not cold, not warm, but textured like worn leather left in the rain. The stairs ended in a narrow corridor that opened into a chamber. John froze. The room was made entirely of black stone, smoothed but pitted with age. It was too large for what should exist beneath a modest church. The ceiling stretched high overhead into shadow, supported by impossibly wide archways carved with symbols that seemed to shift when he tried to focus on them. The air was too still, too quiet. And then he heard it, whispering. Not words, exactly. Just a rising sound, like breath slipping through teeth, circling the walls in unison with a low hum that vibrated in his chest. There were people in the chamber. 24, maybe more. They stood in a wide circle, heads bowed, arms at their sides. Most were dressed in plain black clothes. John spotted a few familiar faces: grocery clerks, the mechanic, the mailwoman, standing motionless as if asleep. At the center of them stood him. The priest, or pastor or minister or whatever he called himself, wore the same immaculate suit, hands folded neatly in front of him. His face was calm, serene, and almost too still. When he moved, it was too fluid, like his bones didn't resist motion the way they should. He stepped forward and raised a hand. "Be emptied," he said. The words reverberated through the chamber. Not loud, not aggressive, just final. The circle of people dropped to their knees. John felt something press against his skull, like a silent suggestion, asking him to do the same. He clenched his jaw and stayed still. The priest's eyes passed over the room, and for a fraction of a second, they landed on the archway where John crouched. His heart froze, but the priest didn't call out. He simply smiled, and continued. John waited until the hum faded and the worshippers filed silently out through a hallway on the far side of the chamber. He backtracked up the stairs as quietly as he could. His breath was shallow when he emerged into the priest's office, sealing the trapdoor behind him. He made it home before sunrise. Stacy was already up, humming softly as she stood in the kitchen with her back to him. "Hey," she said gently. "I was going to wake you." John's throat was dry. "Where were you last night?" She turned, beaming. Her skin was pale, almost luminous. Her eyes shined. "I'm pregnant." He blinked. "What?" "I know it's fast. But it's right, John. I feel it. Everything here, the church, it's healing us." His lips parted, but the words caught. His stomach twisted. She stepped forward and held his hand. "We're not leaving, right?" she said softly. "I need the tabernacle now more than ever." John smiled weakly and nodded. He didn't tell her what he'd seen. Not yet. John had become good at pretending. Pretending to sleep, pretending to eat, pretending that his wife wasn't humming in the next room in that same lilting cadence that had been etched into his brain ever since the night beneath the church. He'd started counting the notes. 17 tones, then a pause. 17 more. It repeated endlessly, each note rising and falling like a breath. He wondered if she even knew she was doing it. Stacy had always been gentle, cautious. She used to double-check expiration dates, used to talk about transferring their savings to a credit union for moral reasons. Now she seemed effortlessly serene, blissfully immune to the weight that hung over John like a storm cloud on the verge of splitting. He stirred sugar into his coffee, watched it swirl. The sugar settled quickly. The bitterness stayed. Outside, the town of Bell's Hollow looked unchanged. White picket fences. Children walking to the tiny schoolhouse with faded red shutters. An old man sweeping the sidewalk. But it was wrong in ways too subtle to explain. The people didn't blink enough. And at night the shadows seemed to crawl. They smiled at him, but the corners of their mouths never quite reached their eyes. Conversations were clipped, synchronized. There was a delay in their responses, as if the words were passing through some unseen interpreter. Worse, they didn't speak of anything real. No one talked about the news, or weather, or sports. The closest thing to casual chatter was the mention of the tabernacle. He gave a powerful word this week. I felt reborn by his voice. We're gathering more now. It's safer when more are gathered. Safer from what? John asked no one. On Tuesday, he passed Mrs. Langan from the bakery. She'd always been friendly. She looked at him with those pale eyes and said, "You're fighting it, but that will pass." He hadn't spoken a word to her. The nights were worse. John had started locking the windows, closing every curtain. He didn't want to see them again. The figures that moved just beyond the yard, in the places where porch lights died and moonlight didn't reach. They never approached, but they watched. He was sure of it. He'd stopped going out after sunset. But he heard them, sometimes whispering, sometimes breathing, sometimes scratching the side of the house, not in a frantic or violent way, but in the way a blind man might search for a keyhole in the dark. He'd wake to the sound of the faucet running, to creaking floorboards, to distant footsteps that didn't belong to anyone in the house. Stacy never woke. Once, John stood in the hallway outside the nursery room they never finished painting. She was inside, whispering, not to herself but to something. He heard the shifting of weight, heard a second breath, and when he opened the door, she was alone. Smiling. "You looked pale," she said sweetly. "I was going to come check on you." At work, his clients called less. His inbox remained oddly empty. When he called the internet company to check his connection, the person on the other end asked him to verify his town. "Bell's Hollow," he said. A pause. "Sir, that's not in our service area." He hung up, checked the bill. It still came monthly. Still charged him. He emailed himself from a different account. Nothing arrived. The town was cutting him off. Then came the day in the woods. John had started walking again, mostly to clear his head. He followed a long, looping path that curved behind the Tabernacle and cut through the edge of the forest. It had always been quiet. That day it was silent. Dead leaves crunched beneath his boot. The air smelled damp, metallic. He didn't realize he was being followed until he heard a second rhythm in the underbrush, subtle but distinct. He turned quickly. No one. Nothing. Still, he moved faster. He took a sharp right, pushing deeper into the trees, trying to shake the invisible tail. That's when he saw it. The shape. It crouched at the base of a tree, maybe 20 yards away. Roughly human-sized, but wrong in the torso. The shoulders sloped too far, and the arms hung past its knees. Its head turned toward him, even though it had no eyes. John blinked. It was gone. When he reached the street again, winded, scratched, and sweating, the mailwoman stood at the end of his driveway, placing a single envelope in the box. She turned her head just slightly. "It's best not to wander where the body hasn't been invited," she said. John stared. "Excuse me." But she was already walking away. He didn't tell Stacy what he saw. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table that evening while she prepared dinner, humming her 17-note melody. "I was thinking," he said, careful to keep his tone casual. "Maybe we take a little break. Head out of town for a weekend." She didn't even pause in chopping the carrot. "Why would we do that?" "Just to clear our heads. Reset. We haven't gone anywhere since the move." She turned slowly, knife still in hand. "We're already where we're meant to be, John. I feel safe here." "Oh, you should too." He nodded slowly. He didn't bring it up again. That night, he stood at the window long after she fell asleep, watching the tree line sway beneath the stars. The Tabernacle steeple rose above the town like a crooked finger pointing toward some distant god. He saw something pass between the trees. Not fast. Not shy. Watching. Waiting. John whispered, "I see you too." The next morning came slow and gray, the sun muted behind thick clouds. Stacy was out early, meeting the other women from the church, she said, her smile lingering too long before she left. John didn't ask where. He didn't need to. He waited 5 minutes after she drove off. Then he packed his flashlight, an old hunting knife he hadn't used in years, and the faded trail map he kept in the junk drawer. The path behind the Tabernacle had to lead somewhere. Maybe the catacombs he'd already glimpsed were just part of a much older system. Something they hadn't buried deep enough. He walked with purpose, boots heavy on the damp soil. The forest was quiet again. Not peaceful, quiet, like the hush before a storm or the pause in a theater before the final act begins. About 20 minutes in, he knew he was being followed. He didn't hear footsteps, but the sensation was unmistakable. A constant tug just behind him, never quite present, never quite gone. It wasn't a person. No snapping twigs. No shifting leaves. Just a hum in his spine, like someone, something, was breathing on his skin from a distance. John turned quickly, 3 times, pretending to scan the trees for birds. Nothing. But once, just once, he caught movement, too smooth for a squirrel, too low to be a deer. It vanished behind a fallen tree the moment his eyes locked on it. He forced himself to keep walking. He found the path again by accident. It was barely there. Just a thinning of underbrush between 2 ridges where the trees leaned unnaturally inward, forming an arch of limbs that didn't sway with the wind. John ducked through. On the other side, time felt slower. The air was cooler, denser. He could hear water dripping somewhere, though he saw no stream. Then he saw it. A small shed sat slumped against a slope of mossy rock, half swallowed by vines and ivy. A rusted metal sign barely clung to its frame. Bell Hollow Mineral Works, Storage. John stepped closer, brushing back the vines that draped across the door. The lock had long since rusted through. He pushed it open with his shoulder. Hinges groaned. Inside, the air smelled like old paper, dried sweat, and copper. The shed's interior was small, 10 by 10 at most. Crates lined the far wall, stacked 3 high, each marked with faded red paint. Explosive materials, Class 1/handle with care. Most were rotted or broken open, filled with powdery residue and empty canvas sack. But one, near the back, was sealed tighter. The nails creaked as he pried it open. Inside, cushioned in discolored wool, lay several aged but intact dynamite charges, a metal ignition box, and blasting caps, all wrapped carefully in waxed paper. The labels were worn, but legible enough to read delayed trigger, 60-second manual activation. John stared, breathing shallowly. His heart beat not with fear, but clarity. He didn't know the plan yet. But these were going with him. He wrapped the materials carefully in his jacket and tucked them into his backpack. The ignition box fit neatly in an inner pocket. As he turned to leave, he noticed a small notebook near the bottom of the crate, leather-bound, mold-chewed. He flipped through. Most of the pages were unreadable, but one phrase was circled heavily on the last page. Shafts breached, gas still active. Do not attempt to relight tunnels. Below it, in frantic handwriting, breathes beneath. Not rock. Not mine. Too big. No end. John's mouth was dry. He folded the book and slid it into his back pocket. Outside, the air had changed again. He couldn't say how, only that it felt watched. Heavy. The forest was still. He began walking back the way he came, trying to keep a steady pace. But his legs wanted to run. Branches moved above him, but not with the wind. Something shuffled to his left, then his right. He broke into a jog. The path narrowed. Brambles tore at his sleeves. The trees seemed closer together than before, their limbs twisted into unnatural angles. Something moved behind him. He didn't see it, but he felt it. Like breath on the back of his neck. His foot caught a root. He stumbled, fell to one knee. Dirt caked his palms. He scrambled up and turned around. Nothing. No birds. No sound. Just the soft rustle of leaves returning to stillness. And in the space between 2 trunks, maybe 20 yards back, a sliver of a shape, pale, slick-skinned, low to the ground. Watching. John didn't wait. He sprinted the last stretch back to the main trail, then all the way to the house. He didn't speak to Stacy that night. She came home humming. Her cheeks were pink. Her eyes sparkled. "The women made me tea," she said. "We all put our hands on one another's bellies. It was sacred." John said nothing. He only nodded, excused himself, and went to the guest room. That night, he pulled up the floorboard beneath the bed and slid the explosives into the space between the joists. Wrapped them again. Laid them with reverence. He didn't have a plan. But he had an ending. John didn't sleep that night. Not truly. He drifted in and out, half dreaming, half mapping routes in his mind. He pictured the tunnels beneath the Tabernacle, imagined where the catacombs might connect to the old mine shafts, where the gas pockets would be, where the Lord might dwell. He kept returning to the same thought. Stacy was gone. Not physically. She moved, smiled, breathed, but none of her was truly there. He had loved her fiercely once, protectively, and part of him still did. But it wasn't love that stirred inside him anymore. It was grief. Not for what had happened, but for what wouldn't. The life they were supposed to live had been devoured by something old and hungry. So be it. He would bury it. The next morning, John stood in the backyard beneath the pale dawn, watching the light stretch long and slow across the pine trees. A woman across the street was watering her garden barefoot, even though the ground was cold and damp. She waved at him absently, her gaze a little too far to the left of his face. John waved back, smiled, then turned inside. Stacy was already up, humming as she poured cereal into 2 bowls. "I made extra," she said. "You've been quiet lately." "Just thinking," he replied. "About the baby?" she asked, her eyes bright and still. He hesitated. "Yeah. The baby." She came around the table and pressed her hand gently to his chest. "You'll be a good father." "He says so." "Who says so?" She tilted her head, as if it were a silly question. "The shepherd. He sees things in you." John's stomach clenched. "I'm going for a walk," he muttered. He didn't walk toward the woods this time. He walked straight into town, across the cobbled square, past the bakery and the shuttered post office, to the white-steepled church. The Tabernacle's windows reflected the gray sky, dull and featureless. The main doors were unlocked. No one was inside. No service today. He crossed the aisle quickly and found the small side door to the office where his memory had once failed him, the place where time had bent. To his surprise, it was open. Inside, nothing had changed. The desk was immaculate. The floor beneath it still held the faint outline of the trapdoor, now sealed tight. But the priest wasn't there. Then the door behind him clicked shut. John turned sharply. The priest stood before him in a fitted dark suit, fingers laced gently over his stomach. His face was as smooth as porcelain, not a crease in sight, like he had never aged or needed to. "John," he said warmly, "you've come back to me. I had questions." The priest nodded as if this were perfectly natural. "Most do, eventually. But it's always the wrong questions that bring people here." "Then what are the right ones?" The priest's lips twitched upward. "Ah. You ask to know, not to understand. But still, that's a start." John stepped backward instinctively. He could feel it again, that pressure behind the priest's words. They filled the space like vapor, weightless but unavoidable. "I want to know what you've done to my wife." "I've freed her." The priest's tone never wavered. "From the illusion of being only flesh. She will birth something that belongs to the coming age, John. Isn't that beautiful?" John clenched his jaw. "You manipulated her." "No," the priest moved closer, not walking so much as gliding. "She heard me. That is all. Hearing is not manipulation. It is invitation. Whatever this thing is down there, it doesn't belong here." The smile widened, ever so slightly. "But it was always here. Long before the mountains formed. Long before language learned to limit thought. It sleeps below, and we feed it so that it may wake gently." John reached into his jacket, toward the ignition box, not to pull it but to feel the weight of it. The priest's gaze dropped slightly. He noticed. "Careful," the priest said. "You still love her. That makes your pain exquisite. But it also makes you fragile." "You'll never touch her again," John whispered. The priest's smile faded. "Just slightly. You think you're unseen. You think the others do not know what you carry in your jacket or beneath your floor. But you are always seen here, John. This valley is not yours. It was never yours." John didn't respond. He turned and left. The priest did not stop him. At home, Stacy was in the garden. Her hands pressed into the soil as if planting something, though there were no seeds. Just dirt. She hummed softly. John stepped inside and went to the guest room. He lifted the floorboard. The dynamite was still there. Dry. Intact. He checked the box. The battery still glowed red. The trigger switch clicked with a satisfying snap. He re-wrapped it carefully and slid it back into the crawlspace. His hands trembled. "That night," Stacy said, "they've invited us to a blessing ceremony." He stirred his coffee. "When?" "Tomorrow evening. At the church. All the women in our circle will be there. They said it's time for you to be part of it." John glanced up. "What happens during the ceremony?" Her smile never broke. "He speaks. And we listen." He nodded slowly. Do you remember the first time you met with him alone? Stacy tilted her head, puzzled. Of course. He was kind. He helped me feel whole again. Do you remember what he said? She blinked. Everything. John studied her. Say one thing, he said. Anything. Stacy's mouth opened. Closed. Her head twitched slightly, like a radio signal losing clarity. Finally, she said, I feel everything he says. But the words, they're not meant for remembering. John looked down into his mug, where the coffee had gone cold. That night, he sat at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and sketched everything he remembered about the Tabernacle's lower level, the tunnel directions, the vent shaft, the room of the gathering. He marked where he would return, where the stone floor had a strange warmth to it, where he thought he smelled gas, where the priest had stood. And beside the drawing, he wrote a single word: soon. John left just after midnight, slipping through the side door while Stacy lay asleep in the bedroom, one hand resting over her stomach. She'd started talking to it, quiet coos, half whispers. Not in English. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't kiss her forehead. That version of them had ended weeks ago. He carried nothing but a flashlight, a map torn from the trail guide, and the ignition box in his jacket pocket. The explosives, 5 wrapped charges in canvas and wire, pressed heavy against his ribs, duct-taped to the inside lining of his coat. A crude setup, not strategic. But that wasn't the point. This wasn't a demolition. This was a sacrifice. The vent shaft sat hidden behind a collapsed cedar tree at the edge of the cemetery, forgotten, rusted, the grate half sunken into moss and roots. He pried it open slowly, careful not to make noise, though he doubted anyone still above ground was truly asleep. The metal stairs descended steeply into a throat of darkness. The air changed by the third step, warmer, wetter, thick with a chemical sweetness that clung to the sinuses like wet rot. He clicked on the flashlight and moved down. The tunnel was narrower than he remembered. The stone walls were slick, veined with bioluminescent growths that pulsed faintly, blue and orange like a breathing bruise. His footsteps echoed strangely, as if swallowed and repeated behind him a beat later. Twice, he thought he saw movement. Long, quick slithers of pale limbs darting just out of the light's reach. He paused, heart pounding, but nothing came. Still, the echoing shuffle of something just beyond visibility persisted like the ticking of a warped metronome. After what felt like 20 minutes of winding descent, the tunnel abruptly widened. John stepped into a chamber unlike the one he had seen before. This one was immense, larger than a cathedral. The ceiling arched high above him into darkness. Massive columns carved with indecipherable runes supported the weight of earth and stone. Along the far wall, rows of what might have once been pews stretched into shadow, but the things sitting there were not human. Not anymore. They twitched in unison. Their spines bowed forward, faces down, fingers long and jointed in too many places. Their skin was wet and mottled, like something left too long in the sea. And every few seconds their bodies trembled, not violently, but as though responding to a signal too deep to hear. John moved slowly, keeping close to the wall. As he rounded one of the stone columns, he froze. The priest was waiting for him, but he was already looking at him. Not startled, not angry, just waiting. His face had changed. It was still human-shaped, but the skin was tighter now, pulled just a little too close over the bones. There were no pores, no imperfections. He blinked once, and when he did, the lids closed horizontally, not vertically. "You came back," the priest said, his voice lower, as if the air itself carried the weight of it. "I needed to see it." The priest tilted his head. "Do you understand now?" John looked past him, toward the back of the chamber, where a vast archway loomed. Behind it, something stirred. The breathing, the same slow inhale-exhale he remembered from his first time below, returned, louder now. More labored. Like something massive was waking from a long, underwater sleep. "Not yet," John said. "But I will." The priest moved closer. His footsteps didn't make a sound. He dreams in you. That's why you feel so much. The grief. The rage. They are his fingers, testing your soul. John's hand brushed the edge of his coat, where the detonator rested in the pocket. The priest's smile deepened. You carry fire. As if flame can unmake what time has failed to destroy. Foolish. I'm not trying to unmake it, John said. I'm just trying to slow it down. You won't save her. The priest's voice grew distant, as if speaking from somewhere behind his own body. The one you loved is no longer shaped like a wife. She is the first womb. She will call him forth. You will burn and she will sing. John didn't reply. He stepped back slowly and turned to leave. The priest didn't stop him. But as John passed the far edge of the chamber, his light caught something carved into the wall. A mural, ancient, scorched in some places by old fire, still glistening with wetness in others. It depicted a city, not this town but something older, being swallowed by tendrils, by eyes, by teeth. People knelt in worship as they were consumed. Not screaming. Not fleeing. Smiling. Back in the tunnel, John moved faster. He marked each twist and turn in memory. His fingers twitched, brushing the edges of the charges taped beneath his coat. He wasn't sure how far the gas reached. He didn't care. When he reached the shaft again, he climbed in silence, emerging into the black woods without incident. But as he stepped back onto solid ground, he heard it. Behind him, the priest's voice, quiet, amused. Even now, he watches you from within yourself. John spun. But no one was there. He ran all the way home. At the edge of the forest, the town lay still and perfect beneath the starlight. Lights on. Curtains drawn. As if nothing beneath it pulsed with ancient breath. As if none of it were real. John awoke to the smell of lavender and something metallic beneath it, faint but wrong. The kind of smell that clung to the back of your throat and made your gums ache. The sun had barely broken the horizon, casting pale fingers of light through the slats of the guest room blinds. The house was too quiet. He sat up slowly, hand brushing the inner lining of his coat. The detonator was still there. The charges still taped into place. The metal edges dug into his ribs when he moved. He welcomed the pain. In the kitchen, the kettle was whistling. Stacy stood at the stove, her back to him, humming. Not the 17-note melody now, but something lower, slower. A lullaby in reverse. She didn't look up as he entered. You were out last night, she said calmly. John froze. I couldn't sleep. Stacy turned then, her face serene, but her eyes were glassy and dark, the color of river stones. Her pupils didn't seem to reflect the morning light. I know where you went, she said and smiled. He told me. John's mouth was dry. Stacy. He showed me the child. He blinked. What? Our child. She touched her belly gently. She will speak the first tongue. The original one. Not with words. With presence. She'll call him John. Fully. Into this world. Isn't that beautiful? No, John whispered. That's not a child. She is perfect, Stacy said. She grows faster now. The others are like me. We're all carrying pieces of him. You should be proud. He stared at her, trying to find a crack, a trace of the woman he once knew. But her voice, her posture, even the way she smiled, it was all too calm. Too rehearsed. He took a step back. You're not well. I'm better than I've ever been, she said softly. You could be too. He says there's still time for you. He turned and walked away. She didn't follow. That afternoon, the house filled with voices. Soft at first, chanting like wind through dry grass. Then clearer, layered. Women's voices. In the backyard, John stepped into the hallway, peering through the blinds. Half a dozen women stood in a ring near the garden. All of them pregnant. All of them barefoot, dresses brushing the soil. They held hands, heads tilted upward, faces painted with chalky gray patterns. Stacy stood in the center, eyes closed, arms raised. They weren't praying. They were receiving. He didn't go outside. He didn't interrupt. He just watched. Later, when the sun dipped low and the sky turned bruised with dusk, John sat in the basement, sketching with shaking hands. Lines of tunnels. The curve of the chamber. The place where the gas seeped from the walls. The mural he had seen, how the faces looked just like theirs. He paused and wrote one word beside the drawing of Stacy. Lost. Then another. Love. He crossed out the second. That night, Stacy came to his door. She wore her old nightgown. The one he liked. The soft blue one with the lace hem. But it didn't fit the same. Her body was fuller. Swollen. Her skin stretched taut over her form, her belly rising too fast. Too wrong. Can I come in? She asked gently. John nodded. She sat on the edge of the bed, her back to him. I remember when we first met. You made me laugh at the coffee shop. You had cream on your chin, and you pretended it was a mustache. He smiled faintly. I loved you then, she said. I still do in a way. But now it's bigger. Deeper. I belong to something eternal. And soon. I'll help bring him forward. He couldn't speak. Stacy turned to him. Her face was wet with tears. But she was smiling. Don't fight it anymore. Let go. We'll be part of something that matters. He wanted to scream at her. To ask if she remembered their wedding day, the dog they almost adopted, the trip to the coast they never took. But what good were memories to someone who had forgotten what it meant to be herself? I'm tired, she said. He says I'll sleep deeply tonight. And then she left. He didn't follow her. He just sat on the bed for a long time, staring at the wall. Eventually, he pulled his jacket off the hook and felt the weight of the explosives shift inside. The metal pressed against his ribs like a whisper of violence. Not vengeance. Not anymore. Something colder. A mercy. He waited until the sky turned black and the house fell silent. He stepped into their bedroom one last time. Stacy was curled on her side, hands resting on her stomach, breathing slowly. John watched her for a long time. She murmured something in the first tongue. And then, without a word, he left. John left as the clock struck midnight. He didn't run this time. He walked, steady, silent, methodical, beneath a pale sky dusted with non-moving stars. The air smelled of soil and blooming rot, and every house he passed on the way to the cemetery was dark, shuttered, as if the town had turned its back on what it knew was coming. He reached the old vent shaft, pried the rusted grate aside, and descended. Each step deeper into the shaft felt heavier, not from gravity but from dread. The air warmed, thickened. The stone walls became slick, streaked with veins of glowing green and orange moss that pulsed like they were alive, like they were breathing. He moved slowly, the detonator cold and solid in his pocket. The charges weighed his coat down like guilt. This time, he didn't feel alone. He heard footsteps, soft, wet, and irregular. Not from behind him, but below. Voices echoed faintly up the tunnel, a low, rhythmic chant in that guttural, non-place-able language. And then he saw them. Below, through a lattice of stone and root, the tunnels opened into a cavern so vast it seemed impossible, the ceiling lost to darkness and the floor broken into tiered ledges like a natural amphitheater. Firelight flickered from torches embedded into the stone itself, as if the rock had grown to hold them. And on those ledges, women. Dozens. Maybe more. Pregnant, silent, swaying. Some wore long pale robes, others were naked beneath the flickering light, their bodies marked with chalky symbols and pulsing blue veins that seemed to glow from beneath the skin. The distorted creatures escorted them, creatures half-formed, sinewy, and slick with mucus. No two alike. One dragged a leg behind it like a slug, another had too many arms, and all ended in hands that flexed and shivered without meaning. Their eyes, if they had them, did not blink. Some of the creatures crawled on walls. Some slithered. All were silent except for the wet sound of their movement and the rattling breath they exhaled through flared slits in their throat. The women didn't resist. They were led downward, deeper still, toward a chasm that exhaled mist and gas, faintly blue, like the breath of something slumbering but aware. As John watched, men, bound, stripped, and weak, were dragged behind them. Not all were led into the depth. Some were thrown to the side, where a pit yawned. John watched, horrified, as a creature unfolded from that pit, something bulbous and mouth-first, dragging itself with no limbs, only muscle and hunger. The men didn't even scream. Their faces were vacant, sedated, perhaps already broken by what they'd seen. The creature consumed them in silence. John's heart pounded, but he forced himself onward, pressing deeper along the upper ledge. And then he saw him. The priest, no longer hidden in fabric and formality, stood in full view atop a ridge of stone, arms raised high in silent benediction. His torso had burst through his suit, the fabric torn like shedding skin. His limbs were now elongated, arms too long for his frame, jointed at unnatural angles. Fingers had become flexible appendages, twitching like sensory organs. From his back sprouted tentacles, not long but thick, muscular things with split ends like hands folding inside out. His face remained. That same calm, porcelain face, but now it hovered above a neck too slender to hold it. Beneath it, his ribs pulsed outward like gills. He swayed in rhythm with the chant, basking in the gas that poured upward from the chasm. And behind him, something moved. The Lord, still unseen in full, was shifting in the mist. John could make out ridges the size of rooftops rising and falling. Segments of armor-like flesh glistened in the light. Dozens of tendrils extended from beneath its body, curling toward the women who knelt at its base. Each woman knelt willingly. Each one was touched, gently, reverently, with a tendril that split into smaller threads, which attached at the base of their spine, their neck, the inside of their thighs. Their faces rolled back in ecstasy, in silence. They weren't being forced. They were receiving. John's breath caught in his throat. This was the purpose. This was the entire town's machinery. The sermons, the smiles, the foggy memories. All of it fed into this grotesque fertility. They weren't worshipping him to keep him asleep. They were preparing his arrival. John turned, slowly retreating. And that's when he heard them, skittering, crawling, coming fast. He turned his flashlight, and the beam caught 4 of the beasts, crawling like insects along the wall toward him. They clicked and wheezed, mouths opening in vertical slits that bled soft light. Their limbs curled around the stone like spiders rearing to strike. John ran. He moved fast through the ledges, ducking behind stone, twisting between columns, leaping over ancient fissures in the rock floor. The air thickened as he went, the gas now strong, clinging to his skin, coating his throat. He could hear them behind him, close. He made it to a ledge that overlooked the vast birthing chamber, where the Lord's tendrils withdrew from one woman as another was gently lowered into place. John's hand went to his coat, brushing the first charge. He didn't know if it would work. He didn't care. This wasn't a mission. It was revenge. For Stacy. For himself. For the life that had been swallowed before it began. He heard the priest's voice rise above the others, no longer words, but pure sound. Resonant. Felt more than heard. And as John turned to look, he saw the priest's body stretch impossibly tall, bones cracking outward, jaw opening into a vertical split that split again into 3, lined with rows of pink, circular teeth. He was no longer pretending to be human. And neither was the world beneath Bell's Hollow. The priest's voice echoed through the caverns, not spoken, but projected, a sound that bypassed ears and nested directly in the skull. Bring him. The unspeakable surged from the shadows. John turned and ran, but his feet slipped on the slick stone. One of them, a lurching thing with backward-jointed knees and a segmented torso, reached him first. It slammed into him shoulder first, knocking the air from his lungs. He staggered sideways, barely avoiding the second, whose hands were wet, clawless stumps that still managed to grip. He swung his flashlight like a club, catching one across the face. It hissed and reeled, but didn't fall. Another lunged low, grabbing his leg with limbs like vines, cold and damp and strong. John kicked, scrambled, and felt something give beneath his boot. He made it 3 steps before a fourth hit him square in the chest. He slammed onto his back, ribs screaming, the wind gone from his body. The flashlight rolled, casting stuttering shadows. More of them descended, 6, 8, maybe more. Crawling down the walls. Dragging across the floor. One clamped onto his wrist with a mouth that was nothing but rows of suction pads. Another pressed fingers to his throat, not to strangle but to hold him still. He thrashed, bit, reached for the ignition box beneath his coat, but a slick, pale hand knocked it away. He screamed. Not for help. For defiance. He screamed because it was all he had left. The creatures only held him tighter. The priest descended the ridge slowly, his monstrous form fully revealed. He no longer walked, he flowed. His limbs bent in slow, spiraling patterns, like seaweed pulled by a current only he could feel. He looked down at John. Such resistance, the priest said softly. Such music in your pain. John spat at his feet. The priest smiled. You were never the threat, he whispered. You were the offering. Behind him, the Lord stirred, massive and breathing, its tendrils rising again from the pit. John strained, but his limbs were pinned. The detonator was gone. His jacket was soaked with blood and something thicker. The fight was over. But the fire not yet. He looked toward the ledge, where the ignition box had landed, blinking red. Still armed. He smiled, even as they dragged him forward, toward the altar. They dragged John to the altar. Not a raised stone or holy table, but a slab of wet obsidian, veined with pulsing red light, warm beneath his back. It trembled with the breath of the thing beneath it, the Lord. The subhuman creatures backed away in unison, vanishing into shadow, slinking along the cavern's walls like obedient dogs released from the leash. The priest loomed over him, arms lifted like a prophet basking in divine glory. His body pulsed, flesh twitching with life not entirely his. Behind him, the chamber shuddered as a fresh wave of gas hissed up from the chasm, curling into the massive ribbed ceiling like incense before an unholy throne. John struggled, but his arms were weak. His legs numb. The fight had drained from his muscles, but not his soul. The priest placed a hand, too long, too soft, on John's forehead. And then, everything changed. It wasn't light nor darkness, but something older than either. John's vision went black and white at once, then colorless. His consciousness, ripped from time, was thrown into an ocean of memory not his own. He stood, floated, beneath a sky that pulsed like a heartbeat. Above it, beyond the thin veil of what he'd once called reality, he saw them. The lords of the Lord. They weren't things. They weren't even beings. They were concepts given hunger, mass given impossible angles. One was an endless spiral of jaws. Another pulsed like a star made from churning blood and bone. One was nothing but wicked beast arms, grasping, ripping, tearing at the void. Their forms defied logic, so vast they bled into other dimensions, existing partially in thought, partially in time, partially in a realm that spoke in equations and screams. They radiated out thoughts filling all with dread or their command. And beneath them, cradled like a larva in the dreaming folds of their abyssal order, was the Lord, the one beneath Bel's hollow. Not their equal, not even their heir, their servant, their seed. John's mind trembled beneath the knowledge. The Lord, ancient and pulsing in the cavern, was only a larval god, a youngling bred to rupture the crust of reality and consume it from within. And now it wanted to be born, to rip apart the fabric of reality and usher in a new age of darkness. No longer the servant. The vision collapsed. John screamed, gasping as his mind slammed back into his body. The priest leaned close. You've seen now, haven't you? Seen his truth. John's voice was a dry rasp. You served that thing? The priest laughed, a sound like glass grinding in sand. I am of him. Not born. Not made. I am what remains when the veil thins too far. I am his echo. Behind him, the Lord stirred. And John saw it. More than shadows. More than hints. It rose partially from the pit, immense, armored plates like a centipede fused with a serpent, each segment twitching with wet, puckered spiracles. Its flesh was black-violet, shot through with veins of luminous green garnet. It bore mouths upon mouths, some filled with chattering, square teeth, others with tongues that licked the air like fingers. And eyes, hundreds, wrinkled, blistered, malformed, and each with a different iris color. Some swiveled independently, others blinked out of sync. They all turned to John. A tendril slid forward. Not to strike, not to feed, to touch. When it grazed his cheek, John felt everything. The oceans that boiled before human history. The first whispers in the void. The collapse of lesser gods before this one was even aware of itself. The graves of stars where it had spawned before the concept of here existed. And its plan, not to destroy humanity, but to absorb it, to take every voice, every language, every face, and wear them like clothing, folding consciousness into itself until it became the only thought left in creation. I will be their God, the Lord said. But not aloud, instead in the mind of all in his presence. It pushed the words into John's skull, bypassing language entirely. I will wear your prayers. I will feast on your art. I will grow on the back of your suffering until I stretch across world. Your species will be the mortar of my form. I will build myself from your limbs and breath and will. Your minds will carry me like flame. John's vision blurred. His hands twitched. He reached slowly into his coat. The priest's head cocked slightly. You cannot burn what was born in fire. John smiled. No, he croaked. But I can make you remember pain. He closed his hand around the ignition trigger. The priest's eyes widened, first with curiosity, then understanding. His limbs twitched, jerking inhumanly as he lunged. Too late. John slammed his fist into the trigger. A second passed. Then, light. The first explosion was a soundless bloom, a pulse of white heat that tore through the cavern in a blink. The gas ignited instantly, flash boiling the mist and shattering stone into molten shards. The mural walls fractured. The black altar cracked open. The vermin creatures screeched, withering like exposed nerve. Their bodies curled inward as the flames devoured their flesh and bone alike. The shock wave rolled through the lower chambers, snapping supports, ripping apart tunnels that had stood for centuries. The priest was caught mid-scream, his body blooming outward, tentacles flaring and burning in bursts of violet flame. His porcelain face cracked, split, and peeled away to reveal something eyeless and raw, which howled as it turned to vapor. And the Lord screamed. Not in rage. Not in pain. In surprise. It had never imagined something so small could hurt it. The explosion cracked through the core of the cavern. The flames surged up the throat of the tabernacle. The church above, silent and dark, burst into fire as the ground split beneath it. The steeple launched skyward, sheared in two by the blast wave. For a moment the whole valley lit up, as the earth crackled with light, then heaved up and fire rained up in the sky like embers rising from a flame. Then fell back. And then it was quiet. Just little fire and embers on the earth. The town wiped off the face of the earth. There was silence for what seemed like an eternity. Not the kind of silence that came after violence, but the silence of an old world ending. A moment of stillness so total, the wind forgot how to move. From a ridge above the valley, where twisted trees clung to cliffs like skeletal hands, a cloaked figure collapsed to his knees. His cloak fluttered weakly in the heat-torn breeze. Ash rained from the sky in sheets, drifting like black snow. Beneath his hood, his face was slick with tears. His sobs racked his body like aftershocks. His fingers curled into the dirt as he gasped between trembling cries. Then the earth shifted. It began subtly. A deep hum below the bones, like thunder with nowhere to go. Stones rolled. Distant peaks cracked. The valley floor, scorched and broken, trembled as fault lines glowed with soft green luminescence. And then the ground split open. Something vast and ancient pushed upward, not violently but with purpose. The jagged edges of rock peeled away like the husk of an egg. Steam hissed. Fire bled from seams in the soil. The Lord had survived. No, the Lord had been born. The cloaked man raised his face, trembling. His eyes, once human, now mirrored the sky, black around the edges, ringed with shifting color like oil over water. His tears dried instantly in the heat, but his joy only grew. He pulled back his hood and stretched his arms wide. "Praise my Lord," he whispered, voice breaking. Then, louder, "Praise him with a voice that is no longer mine." He began to chant, in a tongue that made the trees lean away and the stones pulse with fever. Ol Shara, Navar Galat Shuneth, behold, Karantel Kelmor. His voice grew louder, rising with the wind. As he sang, the Lord rose fully from the wound in the earth. The size of a mountain, it dragged its body into the open world, ripping free from the crust of reality like a fetus from its shell. Segmented armor cracked apart to reveal a writhing form of tendrils and teeth, of many-legged bulk whose every movement smeared the line between flesh and geology. Where it passed, the ground blackened. Grass curled inward and turned to ash. Trees withered in seconds, their bark flaking into embers. From their stumps rose new flora, if it could be called that, dark violet stalks, pulsing with internal ichor, oozing a slow, shimmering poison that hissed as it sank into the soil. The very air changed, thickening with a taste of iron and birth blood. The Lord reared back. Not all the way, never all the way, and from beneath its central mass it gave birth. Not of flesh, not of biology. It shed younglings, malformed and screaming, each one a parody of life. Jointless limbs, many-eyed faces, bodies like puddles of hunger. They hit the ground already moving, already worshipping, already eating. The cloaked man laughed as they spilled past him, brushing against his legs like children. One paused beside him, reaching out with a hand that was mostly mouth. He kissed it, lovingly. "Spread," he whispered to it. "Multiply." The creature chirped, wet and high-pitched, and crawled onward. Above, the sky cracked. Not with lightning, but with fire, black fire that poured upward instead of down. The clouds split into violent spirals, through which distant stars blinked, then shifted. Those stars moved, watched, drew nearer. As if the lords of the Lord, those old architects, had taken notice of the newborn's first cry. The heavens responded. Not with salvation, but invitation. The Lord took a single step. Its limb, whatever it was, slammed into the valley floor with a quake that split nearby rock faces. A grove of trees collapsed. Their trunks didn't break. They folded, twisted into elegant loops of splintered meat, as if bowing to their new sovereign. Where the foot landed, the world changed. Not burned. Not crushed. Transformed. The grass beneath it didn't die, it became something other. Each blade now curled like an antenna, tipped with tiny black eyes that blinked in unison. Insects re-emerged from the soil, but wrong, flattened, glistening, translucent. Crawling in synchronized spirals. A new ecosystem already taking root. A new kingdom. The cloaked man dropped to his knees again, sobbing once more, but this time with ecstasy. "The age of men is over," he whispered to the dark, to the pulsing heat. "And the age of his dreams has begun." He pressed his forehead to the poisoned ground, lips trembling with reverence. He is free. And far in the distance, beneath a mountain of fire and earth and ancient hunger, something else stirred. A thought. A mind. Maybe John. Maybe only his echo. It flickered like a flame trapped in stone. But even if his body was broken, his defiance lived. And in some unknowable way, the Lord noticed, and smiled.